Well, hi, and welcome back. We're up to our oral readings now, or sometimes called oral interpretations. And these are just manuscript speeches. You're going to read to us. This is going to be a pretty easy week for you guys, but don't make it too easy. The point here that I'm trying to get at is delivery, meaning how you use your voice, how you use your body when you make a speech. In order to do that, I've backed off actually preparing a speech and instead let you choose a manuscript that you can read to us. It's 3 to 4 minutes long. For this manuscript, you can choose something that you've written. You can choose something that's out there in the world. We'll go over some options in this about the kinds of materials that you can choose and a little bit more about what I'm looking for. So, oral interpretation. Oral interpretation can be a lot of fun if you let it be. You've got to sort of give up your inhibitions a little bit. You've got to try some stuff. You've got to take some risks, go out on the edge, do too much, or at least what feels like too much. It won't come across as too much, but it might feel that way. Let's take a look at the kinds of materials you can use. You can use almost anything as far as I'm concerned. You can use prose, drama, poetry, serious or humorous. You can use oratory, and by that I mean speeches that other people have done. Though I will give you a heads up on all of these, you probably don't want to do something we've already heard. Please don't do Darth Vader's famous speech or Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. We've heard those. We've heard great people do them. And you're not going to be that good. And it's going to be a little bit hard for us to get those really high-level expectations out of our head to evaluate you based on what you were able to do in a few days. I'm open to almost anything here except essays, textbooks. The material you choose has to have some emotional content. It has to have some feeling to it. Nobody can make a textbook sound interesting. Nobody can make an essay sound interesting. So find something with some passion in it, whether that's anger or happiness or fun or whatever, but something with some feeling, something you can work with here. A note about poetry. Your generation listens to more poetry than any generation ever. If you don't know what I'm talking about music. The lyrics to music are poetry. So yes, you're allowed to do lyrics in here. If we go back through the history of time, the very first poets were virtually singing their poetry. If we go back to the wandering bards of Europe, or we go back to the ancient poets of Athens, we're talking about people who were reciting in melodic and interesting ways. We only got around to reading poetry after the printing press, probably starting with Chaucer, which isn't poetry, but it's fictional. And reading poetry sort of died off in the beginning of the 20th century. I don't know if you figured out why, but it's because we went back to being able to hear music with the really old-fashioned cylinders and vinyl and whatever. Suddenly poetry could be put to a melody with a beat and some harmony. And we went back to that. And now we read less poetry and we listen to more of it. So that's fine. A heads up, and this is usually where people will ask me, well, if I do hip hop and rap, are you okay with that, Leslie? Sure, absolutely. I have my favorite hip hop artists. I really do. Something I want to warn you about, and I warn you about it also in another video. But be careful of language. I don't have any moral problems with most language. Don't worry about it from that end. But generally speaking, when you make choices in a speech, the one thing you have to watch out for is getting your audience so offended that they stop listening, that they cross their arms, they look at you like this. Because once you've done that, you can't get them back again. They've stopped listening. So they're not going to hear you when you apologize or explain yourself or make an excuse for whatever you just said. They've stopped listening. And you might as well stop speaking because they're not hearing you anymore. And that's important to know around language. If you are in a, church group, your language choices are going to be different than if you're hanging out with your friends. A lot of so-called bad language, cuss words, are basically slang today in most contexts. That's fine. It's not to say you don't have a set of words you can't use. And here I'm talking about ethnic, racial, gender slurs, those sorts of things. If you're not part of that group, you can't use those words. So be aware that if you aren't part of that group and you use those words, you are probably going to offend some people and they will stop listening. So make your choices wisely. And one more heads up. I really have an issue with rap that trashes women. And I'm just going to be upfront with that. It's going to be hard for me to grade you fairly if you come in and start calling me a bitch or a hoe or the C word. So watch out for that. Be respectful. But otherwise, pretty much anything goes in these assignments and these oral readings. Pick something that means something to you. Pick something that you've enjoyed over the years or something that grabs your heart in some way. It'll make this exercise a lot easier for you. More ideas about choosing the material. First of all, consider the number of characters in it. I'm going to expect you to use a different voice for each character. That's fairly easy if you're choosing children's literature. You can really exaggerate voices in kitty lit. Daddy bear sounds like this. Mama bear sounds like this. Baby bear sounds like this. And Goldilocks, I don't know, maybe she sounds like this. I really don't know. It's fairly easy to do that with children's literature. When you get to adult literature, that's a little trickier. If you have two women talking to each other, they each have to sound in the reading different and subtly different. So maybe one of them talks like this, and maybe the other one talks like this. And it's going to be difficult, and you're going to have to practice flipping from one to the other. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. So be aware that if you have 3 or 4 or 5 characters in your selection, that they all need different voices. And remember that if you have a narrator, that person has to have their own voice too. Serious or comic? I'm going to tell you that doing comedy is harder. It just is. That's because it includes timing. And I'm not going to teach you timing to do these. On the other hand, if you are funny, bring it on. This is your speech. If your friends laugh with you, not at you, with you, when you tell a story, and tell us a funny story. If not, keep it serious. It is easier. And just to go back a moment to rap music, hip hop music, please, if you do it well, bring it into class. If this is your first time, don't make your grade depend on you suddenly figuring out how to do that kind of beat. It has to have action, intensity, feeling. Okay? Like any good story, and like this chart sitting here, it starts with some background, some setup. There starts to be a conflict. The conflicting forces or conflicting emotions or whatever they are peak. It falls off, and everything resolves at a higher level than where it started. So you need that kind of build in it. Don't just give us the exposition to a piece or just the climax. We're going to need a little before, we're going to need a little after. And make sure it flows. And this gets us the question of flow to the next slide, which is cutting your material. Maybe you have something that's 3 to 4 minutes. Maybe you have a poem that's 3 to 4 minutes long. Great. Okay, do the whole poem. Maybe you have 2 short poems that are somehow related to each other. That's fine too. Okay? But if you don't, you're going to have to cut. You're going to have to cut something off the beginning, something off the end. Maybe you're going to cut something out of the middle. Maybe there's a long passage about Goldilocks being scared going through the woods and you want to cut that out. That's fine. You can do that. You can even put in a little transition if you need it that says, and Goldilocks walked through the dark, scary woods until she came out on the other side and saw Grandma's house on the hill. Whatever. Okay. But it still has to have that beginning, middle, and end, that build that we had on the last slide that comes to a climax. And please don't change the original meaning or the original effect. Okay? Please don't make Santa Claus into a burglar. Please don't make Goldilocks into a monster. Try to keep true to the original if you're going to cut these things. One other thing I want to get to here before I go on to the next slide, I think. Yeah, in choosing a piece, or maybe it's in rehearsing, or maybe both. Be careful if you pick a selection that has a steady, heavy beat. Whether that's rock and roll or Dr. Seuss. If you have a heavy beat, you're going to lose, if you're not careful, you're going to lose the meaning in that beat. It's true of rap too. So for instance, if you have that kind of beat, make sure the meaning is clear. I mean, if you guys know the story of Cat in the Hat, I'm sure. That's a real subversive little story if you think about it. It's telling little kids that let a stranger in the house, tear up everything, and if you put it back together again before mom and dad get home, you're good. That's a twisted little story. But that meaning needs to come through in spite of the beat. So maybe you don't want to stop at the end of every line in poetry. Maybe if you're doing a song, you don't want to do the chorus, that heavy beated chorus after every verse. Maybe you just want to put it after the first verse and after the last verse. I don't know. But make some choices that make sure the meaning of the piece comes through. Now, as you're rehearsing, first of all, know each character. And I say here, know each character's objective, because you need to figure out what they want out of that situation, that story they're in. Every character wants something. And once you know that, once you're clear that this character wants that and that character wants that, then it becomes pretty easy to distinguish them. And as I said before, use a different, believable voice for each character. And believable varies depending on the genre. Make sure you get some gestures in. If you have looked at the physical delivery video, you'll see that I'm asking for at least 3 gestures. But give it some more in this. Have some fun with it. And facial expressions. And look at the camera and look away and see grandmother's house. Work with all of this and make sure you have some movement. Now, this isn't an acting exercise, but it is an exercise in self-expression. So make sure you use everything you've got to express yourself. My final note about rehearsing, repeat it until you know what's coming. Do it over and over again until you know what's up next. Don't let and I've been saying Goldilocks this whole time, and I mixed her up with Little Red Riding Hood, but we'll go back to Goldilocks and the 3 bears here. And Papa Bear says, "Someone's been sleeping in my bed." And Mama Bear says, "And someone's been sleeping in my bed." And Baby Bear says, "And someone's been sleeping in my bed, and they're there now." They're there now. Know what's coming so your script doesn't surprise you. I'll show you for a moment. If I can here, get the whiteboard up. I will show you a little bit about how to do a manuscript for these things. There it is. All right. The manuscript itself. Now again, I'm not going to look at your notes. What you bring up there to do this is on you. I would suggest a book. The book itself is not a good idea. The print's going to be really small. It's going to be a little bit difficult to handle when you're up there. And it's even worse with the paperback, because the paperback doesn't lie flat. It's apt to close on you. And the print is really tiny. Old school way of doing this is you get a piece of paper. Let me set this up here. Okay, there's a little manuscript for you. First of all, most people, when they do these for real, type them out in big font so you can see what's going on. Okay, so you can just glance at it and you know what's coming up next. Another thing that folks do, and I don't know if I can illustrate this here. I'm going to try. No, I really can't. But let's see if I can make my point this way. They will highlight, in fact, starting here with theirs, they'll highlight Mama Bear and say yellow. And they'll highlight Baby Bear in blue. And just the words they say. And they'll highlight Goldilocks in another color. And that way you know what voice is coming up. Okay. It's really helpful to be able to glance down. And if you've rehearsed enough, you automatically know yellow, Mama Bear voice. Okay. After you've done all this, the next thing people do see if I can get rid of this. Is they will take that piece of paper and they'll grab a glue stick and they'll glue it to a piece of construction paper, traditionally black construction paper. Doesn't have to be, because that gives it some thickness. You just have pieces of paper, they stick together, they flop over, they're really difficult to handle. If you glue it to a piece of construction paper, it's really easy to just grab one sheet, put it down, go on to the next one. And you might, if you're really good and really concerned about this, let's see. It's a good bright color. You might want to draw, but don't get carried away with that. You do too much to perform it. But a couple of indicators like that work. That's what a conventional, usual manuscript looks like. You can do what you want, but I will tell you that typing it out is the best way to get to know it. If you type it out, it's like 3 rehearsals right there. So, sheet of paper, big font, highlight different voices in different colors. Maybe put in some underlining or some arrows for the really important stuff. Mount it on a piece of construction paper. And you're probably good to go. That's a conventional manuscript, and it should work pretty well for you. Let's go back to these slides. All right, the framework of this. The introduction. We're going to take all the elements out that I gave you before, except the title and the author for most of you. You don't need to tell us the main points. You don't need to give us an attention getter. You don't need to give us a connection to the audience. And please don't tell us what it means. Let us make our own decisions about what it means. Let what it means come through in your delivery. If you have to explain it, you're not doing it right. So simply begin with, I'm doing a piece called blah, blah, blah by so-and-so, and you're done. Unless you're doing a cutting and you've chopped off some of the beginning and maybe we need just a little information to set us up. Don't get carried away with this, a sentence or two, like, I don't know, before Goldilocks got to the bear's house, she'd gotten separated from her parents and she was lost and cold and hungry. Period. Just that much. Just what we need to start off where we are. The conclusion, we're going to take out the main points. We're going to take out the ta-da. The conclusion is just going to be thank you this time. That's it. Nearly all of your 3 to 4 minutes is going to be on the piece you're reading. And that's it. That's an oral reading. If you have any questions, just ask, and I hope this gets you started.